And now we move on to the main debate of the evening, with the motion, "This House believes the University of Aberdeen has failed its students during COVID-19, with the opening speaker for proposition, Gregor. So whenever you're ready, Gregor, I will start a timer for you.
So we're asking today whether the university has failed us, and it's quite clear that it has. The NDP policy that was put in place last semester, well, not last semester, the semester before that, in the last academic year, wasn't just not broad enough, but was kind of rushed. And the fact that the university up to this point has failed to do so shows it clearly doesn't care about students' welfare or how they might be struggling. This is obviously a difficult time. We're obviously all on a Zoom call rather than in person. And that's so challenging for so many people. And they might have difficult circumstances. The university doesn't seem to care. It doesn't seem to understand that people's academic abilities have gone down because of the situation they're in. So many people have lost their jobs, which for many students who aren't millionaires, like the principal, for example, can be potentially the only source of income they have. And we have to consider the university has failed because of its lack of an NDP policy to consider that. And with obviously our death toll in Britain now over 112,000, so many students and the general public have lost family members, they've lost friends. That's difficult to deal with at the best of times. Never mind a time when we're all in lockdown, we can't do anything, we can't kind of deal with grief, we're kind of stuck inside. That's the only thing we can really do. There's not the distractions that people might normally get when it comes to grief. And even outside of that, students' mental health is struggling. People are challenged. I remember when the last semester, I myself struggled with my mental health. I ended up in a psychiatric hospital in June last year. And to think that there won't be students who will struggle in a similar way this year, but won't get the help. I'm not going to take the point of order. Won't get the help from the university to deal with that, or haven't had the help, shows how much they don't care and how much they've failed us. The lack of consideration for how difficult it is to do lectures online, or how people may not be able to work because they may be stuck at home, which might be a difficult environment. So the lack of NDP policy means that people are stuck in a situation which may not lead them to achieve as much as they could. We have widening access policies and all the rest of it. But if at a time like this, the university doesn't understand that those students who may be in difficult situations, may be in difficult family situations, as I said, they may not have the luxury they have in Aberdeen of being in a study-focused environment, then they are going to struggle, and you have to really take account of that. And we're not all equal. We're not all like when it comes to student stuff. As I said, there's people who've got different social classes or different backgrounds, or people with disabilities who simply just don't have been given the access to the resources they would normally have. The student support system is non-existent. It wasn't there anyway. But it's even less so. It's difficult to contact them. I think I will end my speech there. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Gregor, for the opening speech of the night. Now we move on to Maxwell, who'll be opening the opposition side of the argument. So whenever you're ready, Maxwell, I will start a 5-minute timer for you.
Okay, so it looks like the NDP policy will be a main focus of the debate tonight. And so I think it is best to actually approach the topic directly and not dance around the details of what it does, because we've heard from side government that it's this supposedly amazing thing that will solve all of our problems without even explaining to me what the NDP is. I will use my current understanding of the no detriment policy to try and give analysis, but if any of this analysis is wrong, that is a merit against our government. But it is not, because the NDP policy roughly aims to preserve your grades, so that your grades cannot go below the I believe the highest grades you gotten, like the most recent grades you gotten before the pandemic. So let me explain why this is actually problematic and why this will lead to the grades being considered lower across the board. Because in an NDP policy, you're obviously going to get these results regardless. This means is that if you got a B last year, you're getting a B this year. So despite the fact that somebody there's now, let's imagine two people who get Bs from the situation. Somebody who got the B from last year and therefore doesn't have to put through the work in order to pass. This person, because like they haven't learned, I'll bring that to you at the end later. But because you have anyway, so in this case, though, if you have the same thing, the fact is tests reflect how much you have actually learned. And the fact is, the reason is if you would fail a test otherwise, that means you do not have the information that's necessary to get the degree. In order to get the job, I still can't answer your question, even if everybody else can hear you, George. So, like, I'm sorry. Anyway, the point is that the point is with a no detriment, because like it does ultimately grades do reflect how. Could you try that one more time?
The no detriment policy is not about individual grades, it's about degree classification. This is something that I've been looking into because it's my final year, but it's about not allowing your degree classification to be brought down by grades as a result of the pandemic. So it's not individual course grades. So that was just the context I was offering.
Sure. Then my example changes. Your course classification would have gone down because your course classification still reflects how much you've learned and how much your ability has, and therefore how much a job wants you. Thank you for telling me about the precise details, but my point still stands roughly, which is that since the degree classification reflects how much you've learned, if you like get an unearned degree classification, it's because you actually know less than you should have to get that degree classification. Meaning, in a no detriment policy situation, two people, one who's like learned all the information for the degree classification, and one who hasn't, but still gotten the correct degree classification because of no detriment policy, apply for a job. The job doesn't actually know who to pick over. And also means a lot of employers will get experience of having people who are not good at the job because they haven't learned the necessary skills to get their degree, to get the proper degree classification, meaning that the entire year is going to have invalidated degree classifications in the eyes of employers because of the fact that there's a no detriment policy ensuring that people don't have to put in the work to get the degree out. And I do understand there's difficulty in getting in the pandemic. There's difficulty for all of us. But ultimately, you still need to but ultimately, the fact is employers still care about what you do. Moreover, a lot of the difficulties aren't exactly the university's fault. So firstly, well, let's see. Talking about the fact that there's a lack of support available. This is not a problem to do with the university's handling of the coronavirus, not to do with the university's handling of the pandemic, which is what the debate is about. These lack of responsive institutions already existed beforehand. And the fact is, people who would suffer from the way things were beforehand would not get the support necessary. So there's the university has terrible things, but that's not specifically part of the debate because it's not part of the actual coronavirus policy. The thing is, the university has provided adequate institutions to deal with academic situations. They have created an entirely new system, Blackboard, to deal with tutorials. You have access to almost all of the lecture materials that you would have otherwise. You have access to resources and notes. And there's many, and there's individualization, but ultimately, the university doesn't handle people's social lives. It handles academic lives. And if your social lives are having problems, that's not a university's fault. For all these reasons, please oppose this motion.
And thank you very much, Maxwell, for opening the opposition side of tonight's debate. Now we move back to proposition with Zach. So Zach, whenever you're ready, I will start a 5-minute timer.
Okay. I wanted to start sort of talking, try and keep this relatively brief. Use of a bit of an analogy. So if we imagine if I were to purchase a product, for instance, and I knew the standard of that product that I was paying for it, and I was okay to pay for it, if that product is then reduced in quality, the price should also reflect that. So the main thing I'm going to be talking about is tuition fees. Now I know some people here won't be paying tuition fees. I personally paid just over £9,000 a year from student loan, obviously. So apologies, this doesn't apply to you. But as I said, if you have something that you expect, but then it is reduced in quality, you expect the price to represent that as well. Now, the university has been saying that online learning is equivalent to in-person learning. It's saying that it's exactly the same, not the same level of quality, therefore the prices won't be changing. You get the same thing, right? Anyone that has done online learning compared to in-person knows that that just isn't even close to true, right? At the start of term, the university placed a lot of praise on blended learning. They were very enthusiastic about it. Oh, it's safe to come to uni. We've got this brand new thing called blended learning. Look how brilliant it is. My question is, they still had problems September with COVID. It hadn't gone away. It was still a thing. There were still figures, and that's why they were putting safety measures. If online learning is equivalent to in-person learning, why didn't they put the whole thing online? Why didn't they do that from the get-go? This is going to be online, as some other universities did. And the answer is pretty much because they knew that students wanted some in-person learning because it is better. They knew they could accommodate, and they did at the time, for in-person learning, and they did that for what they could. But the reason they did it is because they know that it's better, and they will turn around and say, no, we're going to do it all online now, and it's fine because online learning is just equivalent, but it's not, right? If it was equivalent, they would have just done it all online up until December anyway. It's not the same level of quality. An example on that is facilities, right? Yeah, go on. PI.
So if they know it's better, why have they stopped doing it? What's forcing them to stop doing it?
Well, in terms of restrictions, they've, you know, if the university said, all right, we're doing in-person learning, or even if they carried on blended learning, the publicity would smack them in the face, and they know that. They can't. They have to go sort of with a grade of other universities to an extent. If you look at, say, Manchester, they were online mostly for the first time, a lot more than we were. Aberdeen don't have to keep up with them fully, but they're not. They can't do what was it? Some countries have done in terms of does not have any restrictions because, well, students wouldn't feel safe, students wouldn't go, and they wouldn't have any business really. If you look at facilities, like for instance, the library, you've probably all been to the Sir Duncan Rice Library, you know that lots of facilities are closed off, right? That's at that point, that's not a swap in quality. That is a blatant reduction. They've cut that bit out. And I'm not saying they shouldn't cut it out because they've cut off facilities where people would mingle and coronavirus would spread. But if they cut it out, they have reduced their product, therefore they should reduce tuition fees because there are several facilities, types of learning that just are not the same, are not good enough, and therefore the university has failed, essentially. If you're questioning whether or not it's failed, have a think about whether or not it's succeeded. Has it successfully implemented, given us value for money for £9,000 a year? No, not even close. To me, it's ridiculous that the university is still able to just tell people that this learning is equivalent and it's fine. It's not. Like for my degree personally, I study history and philosophy, very talkative subjects, very sort of debating subjects as this is. Having you all had online seminars, trying to have a discussion over collaborate on a blank screen with someone, camera on or not, is very, very difficult compared to in person. You can have that comparison from online tutorials last time. It just is not the same, and it's not as good. So concluding, Mark, it's not as good. The price should reflect that. The University of Aberdeen has failed us because it is not reflecting that in the price. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Zach, for the second proposition speech of the night. Now we move back to Robert for the second opposition speech. So Robert, whenever you're ready, I'll start a timer.
So I'm going to engage with what Zach just said, because the university, while it is offering a lower product, it is not failing me, at least me. It possibly is failing the fourth years, but I wouldn't say it's failing second years or third years, because the university must charge its tuition fees or it goes bankrupt. Right? Universities do not sit around with a year's worth of money in their bank accounts in liquid assets that they can just use up at the drop of a hat. They require the money to keep coming in. And because the government has had no commitment to bail out universities because they've had no commitment to keep things going, the university must keep charging its tuition fees in order that it can keep running, in order to provide degrees to students once COVID is over. Yeah, Gregor.
So if it's not failing them, how is it not failing them if it's not giving them the teaching that it normally would? Or how is it not failing first years, for example?
Oh, first, they are all getting a worse experience. My argument is that the university cannot do stuff to give them a better experience. The university has its hand, right? We heard from Zach how the university cannot open up. That's not something it's allowed to do under government guidance. We've heard earlier also that the university is messing us around, right? It brings us in for September with blended learning approach, but to send us away again, right? That's not its fault either, right? It can't control the pandemic. It can't control the guidance. It's trying to give us the most that it can at any one point. And every time what the government is saying is we will ease up restrictions soon. We'll get normal soon. This is a temporary thing, right? So the university's acting along with governments that it's a temporary thing, and then and putting us into the university for a small amount of time before the government guidance swings away because the government mishandles the pandemic and the numbers go through the charts, and then we all have to go home again, and then we get larger problems. And this also means that lecturers aren't prepared for it. This means that which detracts from the quality. This is the heart of a lot of the issues here. So we are stuck in a situation where the university doesn't have to deal with this problem that doesn't screw over students. So my argument is not that the university has failed people, but government has failed the students. What the government should be doing is the government should be saying, we're taking on this responsibility. We're going to pay for your tuition fees. We understand that things are going wrong. This is the civic duty of us to protect our students, right? We're going to step in and make this as possible, right? Because there's no way in which you as students get the level of education they is otherwise get. And I do agree with Maxwell. What he said is the beginning of the job of the university is to give you an accurate degree, right? It's to give you a degree that reflects your your achievements, what you've learned, and everything going forward. So, and that's what you get. But you're paying for both those things. You're paying for accuracy, you're paying for the degree at the end, you're paying for the teaching you get along the way. You should be taking it out on the university that you're not getting the education that you deserve because they have no control over making that any better. And you shouldn't be taking it out on the university for giving you accurate grades because that you're paying for them to give you a qualification that will stand out, right? And so from every point of view, the university is just doing what it is, what can within the limits of the current situation and within the limits of the law. And sure, there's other issues, but the university does not necessarily have a responsibility toward our mental health and the effects of being locked down and the effects of not seeing people, which is the major cause of mental health problems. The university can't do anything to help that. So I'd like to hear more from the proposition of what exactly they think the university should have been that would solve all the problems that they are talking about. Because I don't think we hear that and we don't think we get out of that. I think the university have taken the reasonable route given the circumstances, and so they have not failed us. Also, this is not necessarily my own opinion. I'm involved in the No Detriments campaign and happy to help out with that sort of stuff.
Thank you very much, Robert, for the second opposition speech of the night. And now we move back for the final time to proposition with George for a 7-minute finish up for proposition.
Okay, you can all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Starting the timer. Okay, so what I'm going to do is talk about what we've on side proposition have gone through: mental health, rent, facilities, and the overall academic impact of this pandemic. And in failing to address any of these issues, the university has failed its students throughout the course of this pandemic. Regarding mental health, and this is tied into some direct rebuttal of what Robert has been putting forward, I would argue, and side proposition would argue, that the university do have responsibilities not only to students' mental health and well-being, but also to their social lives. We heard from previously from Maxwell saying that they don't have a responsibility to be supervising the facilitating good social connection. No, it may be a new idea that I'm putting forward here, but I'd say that the university are in loco parentis here. Because of the necessity of a degree in the modern era, the university are there to provide the accommodation of a living and fit standard, to provide mental health support for students' environment, and to provide even basic requirements such as food. So these are all things we've been talking about last term about what does the university owe us. In failing to meet some of these requirements, the university has really had a negative impact on students' mental health. We've been messed about in the university's poor communication with its students, so that adds to stress and uncertainty. The university have proved that it doesn't really care about students' welfare, in fact that there's no not allowing a no detriment policy for what we talked about with the loss of loved ones, with the death toll being high, not being able to go home and see family and friends. I talked about this before Christmas, not being able to go home. So all in all, with regards to mental health, the university is in loco parentis because of its situation. It does have a direct responsibility to the students' well-being, and in failing that, as it has way before this pandemic, but particularly within this pandemic, in failing to meet and address students' mental health needs, they are failing their students in their lives and in their degrees. Let's talk about rent. With regards to most students, as we pointed out, most students are not millionaires like the principal. We can't take off on jollies down to South Wales. We don't have multiple houses provided for us by the university like senior management. So all these ideas about students being in any way privileged or anyway coming from a rich enough background, in a university setting, we're all stuck in these same cramped rooms. We're all on the same boat with this. The university told us to come back to university at the beginning of this year. They told us to come back on campus, and they made such this big deal out of blended learning and the fact that, yes, you will get time in labs, you will get time on placement. They made that promise to us, and they have failed to live up to it. They have failed to follow through with it. They knew this pandemic was going to carry on into this academic year. So why on earth they did not make a proper provision for lab time and placement under pandemic regulations over the course of the summer escapes me. Why on earth did they not make this proper provisions for that? So students have come back to university, or they've been sent back home and cannot get out of contracts in student halls or in private halls, which the university have been notoriously quiet about. They haven't lent upon the private halls, Liberty and Unite, to allow the university students out of their contracts. So students have had to turn to tenants' unions and self-organising to help them with that. Finally, let's talk about academia. The no detriment policy, as I was trying to make out, it is not about making the degrees worthless, as we hear from side opposition. It is about making sure that the work that fourth-year students like myself have done over the past 3 years is not invalidated by the pandemic. Your degree classification cannot come down and cannot be affected by the pandemic. That is what the no detriment policy is. And in rejecting the no detriment policy, the university are failing to acknowledge that we as students come from different backgrounds, different home lives, have different disabilities and capabilities. They are ignoring the difficult circumstances that students find themselves in. For the majority of us, for all of us, we are not in a study-focused environment. If we're on campus, we don't have access to library or study spaces like me. If we're at home, like I know some other members of this house are, it is not a conducive environment to studying. I would hate to have the idea of being forced to write your undergraduate dissertation in your childhood bedroom. It's terrible, it's horrible. And in rejecting the no detriment policy, the university are failing its students, 40 students, in that they obviously don't care about how the students come out of this year, what degree they have. They obviously don't care about their students' academic results. With the university determining online teaching, we've heard from opposition about, oh yes, it's all online, that's fine. But honestly, can you tell me, look me in the eye and say that an online video lecture that has no interaction with students, you've all got your cameras off, is that actually to the same quality of teaching and imparting knowledge as in-person in classroom tuition? That is what we're paying tuition fees for. That is what we are here at university for. If a university is failing that fundamental part of its mandate, imparting of knowledge to undergraduates, if it is failing in that, then it is failing its students. Because of the fact, as we've seen tonight, that this kind of online technology is still in its infancy, it is really only 10, 15 years old. So in a technological long view, it is in its infancy. So the university can't teach to a successful standard as it would have done on campus. So it is failing its students, it is failing its undergraduates. So if you want to make that message clear to the university, vote for this motion, vote proposition. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, George, for concluding the side of proposition for tonight. And now we move to the final table speech of the evening, which is also 7 minutes, to Helen. So whenever you're ready, Helen, I'll start the timer for you.
Right, so I'm going to do a bit of whipping and then I'm going to present a final point about everything because I have the last word and I'm going to use it. First of all, a bit of rebuttal. We've heard that online lectures suck. They're the worst. I agree, they do kind of suck, but they suck for a lot of people. However, there are some people that online lectures do not suck for. Online lectures are pre-pandemic, sometimes the preferred way of going about learning. And for example, if I have a teacher who sometimes talks very fast and it's difficult to take notes at a good speed, then having the caption part of Panopto could be quite useful for me to get proficient notes. So students' academic performance has not been uniformly disadvantaged around here. And I think that's like a bit of nuance that we need to just yeet in there. Okay, so no detriment policy, we'll start with that. So we heard that the no detriment policy is a very bad thing. And, you know, because of the dip in academic performance due to everything that's affecting students. I agree that a no detriment policy was a good idea last March, but something has changed since then. And the thing that's changed is that lecturers have had sufficient time to prepare. Lecturers have had a year in which they can learn how to use online learning and begin to teach properly, which means, and they've been supported in doing so. The university has been actively pushing lecturers towards, you know, actually teaching students online. So this is a difference from 2020, where students were just chucked in the deep end and completely contact lost, right? And the fact is that I am sitting and I'm doing online classes, and that is a better situation than I would have been in last year. The other thing is as well that this is not an absolute complete failure by the university's part, because the university might still adopt this policy. It's being reconsidered in the Senate. It's a bit of a dick move on their part, but you know, it's being reconsidered. In a minute, George. Okay, the second thing is the idea that university is a business and you're not getting the product you paid for. As Robert so eloquently pointed out, you need to pay tuition fees so the professors don't go bankrupt. There's stuff staff that the university has to pay in order to continue to be effective. And, the university having money means the university has money to look after us, like fund student services, for example. And yeah, that was mostly debunked by Robert, so I'll leave that. Yes, the mental health thing, there have been signs of improvement, right? We were told not to come back to campus after Christmas, and I think this is the university beginning to acknowledge that a lot of people are better mentally than at home than they would be on campus alone, right? So the university is learning just like the rest of us. It's learning how to live with a pandemic and how to help its students. So I also don't think it's like a complete failure there. It's, a bit of a failure, but not a complete failure. Okay, I have a point. I'll take POI from George first.
With you're saying, oh, things have changed, then how do you respond to the fact that the overwhelming majority of students don't feel that anything's changed, don't feel that this tuition is acceptable, and that there's petitions of 2,000 students going around to implement a no detriment policy, 2,000 being a far higher number than we see in any other democratic engagement ALSA do. So 2,000 students of the university saying that this kind of tuition is not acceptable. What do you say to that?
I say that we have reached a time in contract law that you would call a bit of a frustration, and the university is doing its best to provide a competent product, and students have the right to feel annoyed about that product, but it doesn't mean that they've failed. The fact that teaching is happening, that people are sometimes learning, and that the university is doing its absolute best and learning from its mistakes means that it can't have failed us completely, because to fail us completely, it has to have proved that it's not cared about us. And I think that it does care. It's not very good at it, but it cares. Okay, so my last thing to say is the university has not failed us because it's kept us alive, right? Most students are still alive. The university has not had to lock people into dorm rooms en masse. We saw that in a couple of English accommodations where they just kind of made them prisons, and that was fun for everyone involved. And the university has also not facilitated a massive COVID outbreak. And these two things were the burden the university had to bear when it brought us back in summer. It had to not kill us with COVID and not lock us in like prisoners. And it didn't do that. And for that, I appreciate it. It had difficult circumstances. It had to make tough decisions, and things are not as great as we thought it once was or should have been for in-person learning. But it didn't give us all a highly infectious respiratory disease. And, that's that. If it had given us all COVID, I would have think it was a failure, because then all of its stupid things would have just been for nothing. But it didn't give us COVID. And I think, as my final point, the ultimate blame for the way the university and all universities have handled the pandemic does not fall at the university's feet, because the university has been following government guidance. And so I think the ultimate blame here falls on a government that does not fund the NHS sufficiently, either its physical or its mental health divisions, and did not treat students as adults. They did not tell us what the world was going to look like when the science was pointing that we would not have in-person lectures or in-person society events from September. And a government that used students as a cash cow and then a scapegoat. Ultimately, the failure of this year, the troubles of this year, could have been avoided if the government had been competent. The government was not competent. And so the university is doing its best with the advice that's been given, just like its students. And together we should unite against the ultimate enemy, the people giving us bad advice. And for that, I say, please oppose.
And thank you very much, Helen, for the final table opposition speech of the night. So now that is concluded, we move on to the floor speeches. These are 3 minutes in length. We start with proposition. So if anybody would like to come forward. Yes, someone's written in the side chat. So if you turn your microphone on, I'll give you a 3-minute timer.
It was just to touch on a couple of points made by the opposition in this debate, especially in Robert's speech. These aren't direct quotes because I couldn't remember, because my memory's not the best. But the general idea I got, and these being snapshots, is the uni is failing us. It's not giving us the standard that it gave to the students from past years. It's not the same experience, and it's worse. And I'm just wondering how he can then justify the price being the same when he's clearly stated himself that the product is not the same. And the second point I just wanted to make is that Helen mentioned that the uni has kept us alive, and hasn't caused a massive outbreak. But back in October or November, there was actually a COVID outbreak at Hillhead. And I know countless flats that had to go into lockdown because of COVID outbreaks at Hillhead, whether that be down to the students' behaviour or coronavirus in general. Then that is still, left to say. But the fact that there is still the possibility of an outbreak, university, obviously they can't lock us in, but they can still do more to prevent these things. They could still do more to try and facilitate things in the halls, currently where I am at the moment. And make it a safer, more relaxing place for students to be. And that's it. I had another point, but I'm not able to remember it, so I'll just end my speech there.
Well, thank you very much for that. The first proposition floor speech of the night. Now move on to opposition. If anyone would like to speak in opposition, don't imagine there are many opposition cases. So move to abstention. This is neither for nor against, or just a comment for both sides on how the debate went generally. Fiyin.
Great. Firstly, huge thank you to all the speakers for what I thought was quite a good debate. The reason I'm going for abstention is because I feel like I'm thinking about the two sides, and because I'm not on the table, I can pick, I can say give two-sided coin, like my two penny for my thoughts. I'm speaking as someone who is an international student, so my fees are over 15 grand. So, I think like the group that I'm part of in terms of international students, we are definitely not getting, we're bearing the biggest burden in terms of COVID, and there's a lot more pressure, maybe to an extent, on us to get these degrees because of the amount that it's costing. Now, it's important at the point in which we're paying the university for a quality education, they're having to support that in academic, mental, and social capacities, right? The uni was making money of students in accommodation and in, social events. So at that point, based on their previous actions, they've taken on social and civic burdens of their students. And obviously I can understand, the pandemic has had a widespread impact on I don't think there's virtually no industry that has been untouched, but I think it's still important that when that quality dips, students are rightfully annoyed and have the right to question the quality of education and challenge it and challenge the university to really be open with us about what they are doing to answer those questions. So I think the burden is definitely on, as students, on the university to prove to us that, when they were taking money for social events, that burden that they took upon themselves to give us good social and emotional environments, they still have that burden. That has not stopped. So how are they fulfilling that? And I think also there's something maybe different is that employers are acknowledging different circumstances. So employers are doing things to allow groups from underrepresented minorities and that kind of thing to enter the industry. So what is the university also doing to accommodate for the different experiences that we're all having during COVID? Now, from my positive side, because I have less than 1 minute and this is not a 7-minute speech, one example how the university, I think our university personally is showing up is transparency. They are communicating with us. I'm sure everyone who's an undergraduate got an email today, basically about the quarantine discussions that they're having and about fair and consistent assessments. And also as a Nigerian student, when the NSARS thing that happened, which you may or may not know about, our uni was one of the only unis to contact their Nigerian students, say, we see you, we hear you, we know this tragedy has happened in your country. And if you need support from us, these are the channels you can, go to. So I think overall, we as students have a right to question the quality of education we're taking up because of the burdens the university has taken on in the past, but we also have to acknowledge when they have shown up for us. But yeah, that's my 2 cents. That's pretty much it. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for the abstention speech. Now we move back again to proposition. So anybody who'd like to give a proposition case? George?
I'll do it. I'll talk proposition if nobody else is.
Go on then.
As we're doing extension for speeches. Okay, 3 minutes. So just to talk about failure and what does, because it may have been a waste of time to define it on the table, but I want to define it now, is university hasn't fulfilled its mandate that we as paying customers are paying for, but also as a society we have universities around to do. What is the purpose of a university? It is to impart knowledge to undergraduates, to the next generation. Its purpose is to award degrees, and its purpose also is for research and development. We're not talking about the research and development side of it because we're not involved in that. We're the students. We're the ones who are being or should be being taught. We're the ones who should be being awarded with honours degrees at the end of this process. So you need to be able to judge the university on whether it has failed or succeeded as that. I'd say it has failed its students, as well as failing its academics and the wider world. In failing to give students requisite lab time, field trips, it's failing academic sector in not being able to teach research methods. In failing to give graduates placements, work experience, commonly undertaking, it's failing the public sector, so NHS students, medical students, teaching students, it's failing that sector. But to talk about teaching, the pandemic, which was known to be coming, which we knew would be of a global scale, has triggered a loss of learning at a ridiculous amount. And the fact that the university have not had any proper plan for this going into it, they've not had any proper leadership. And Fiyin talked about, oh yes, they've communicated. I disagree. They have communicated very badly. They have very bad channels of communication with students. It's either lost all in text, or it's in denial, or it's in refusing to meet students, as I talked about last term in talking about the fact that the Vice Principal for Education refused to meet with students and student groups. So the university has failed. Its mandate is not to keep students alive. Its mandate is not to stop an outbreak. That's the government's job. Its mandate is to teach undergraduates, to teach students, and to award them the majority of students, and I think the majority of people on this call, will agree that it has failed in that. And the decision about whether they have failed or not isn't down to the university, it's down to us, the students, the customer, the learner. So if you want to make that decision and show that you agree that it's failed, vote in favour of this motion, show the university how you feel, show them that you have been failed. Thank you.
And thank you very much, George, for the proposition speech. Now we move on to opposition. So anybody who wants to oppose the case tonight, please raise your hand. I don't imagine, again, there are many. So if no one wants to do that, we'll move on to abstention once again. Yep, Jack. So whenever you're ready, Jack, I'll set a timer for you.
Great. I haven't prepared a speech, but I did have a couple of comments on the debate. Full disclosure, although I would be inclined to support this proposition, I would abstain because I was slightly disappointed to see that aside from a couple of sort of small comments, there was effectively no mention of first-year students. I think arguably first years such as myself, along with fourth years, have suffered the most from these restrictions. Some of you may remember a predominant COVID-related scandal that uni was publicly known for before the no detriment policy became centre field, was actually the uni's terrible handling of students self-isolating at Hillhead. For those unaware, they were £75 per week for sort of out of date bulk bought food until they were forced to do a U-turn after public outcry. I mean, in addition to the often publicised sort of nonsensical disciplinary policy, if you Google Aberdeen University Hillhead, you'll find article after article of police having to be called because the uni staff have absolutely no grasp on the situation whatsoever. You know, although I'm immensely sympathetic towards the later years in this situation, I understand why they are at the forefront of this debate. It does sometimes feel as if those that have only just started our studies, such as myself and my fellow freshers, have sort of been left behind in terms of this debate. That will be all. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Jack, for the speech. Okay, let's move on to the next round. So the way we conclude every Thursday evening's debate is by a vote. If you raise a hand at proposition and opposition, but when abstaining, don't do anything at all, and it'll pass on. So when I say proposition, we'll vote on the motion. This House believes the University of Aberdeen has failed its students during COVID-19. Remember, message in the side chat, raise your hand, and I will count you. So everyone raise your hands now. Let's go on to the next page. Thank you very much. Oh, even more. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, and if you raise your hand in opposition, if you think the university has not failed its students. Okay, well, with a very, very clear majority, this House does believe that the University of Aberdeen has failed its students during COVID-19. Thank you very much. Before we go, we're going to announce next week's motion. Thank you very much. So next week's motion will be, this House believes that Western governments should increase sanctions upon Russia. This is in relation to the recent Navalny arrest and protests across the country. If you wish to speak at this event, please message the page or myself or any member of council, and they will get back to you with a place. Again, thank you very much everyone who showed up tonight and everyone who spoke tonight as well. A really good debate all round. So yeah, thank you, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks everyone.